Hello, I'm Burt Lancaster. On the 8th of October, 1941, the war between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia had been underway for almost 4 months. On that day, Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, broadcast from Berlin that Moscow had fallen. Hitler's troops, he said, could see the Kremlin towers from their front lines. Another 4 or 5 days, and the swastika flag would fly over the Kremlin. Germany believed these reports, so did many others. After all, Hitler had conquered Western Europe. He had blitzed London. But here, in this area, some 16 miles from the Kremlin, and commemorated by these symbolic anti-tank obstacles, the Nazi blitzkrieg came to an end. Here, in the Moscow suburbs, the Red Army and hundreds of thousands of ordinary men, women, and children threw up barriers which the Nazi tanks could not crack. Here the tide was turned in the unknown war on the Eastern Front.
Much of it destroyed, Smolensk was in German hands by the beginning of September. Its defense had bought time, but at fearful cost to the Red Army. At the end of the month, the German High Command assessed the total Russian losses over all the front at 2.5 million men, 22,000 guns, 18,000 tanks, and 12,000 aircraft. Almost exactly the figures for the total Russian strength the Nazis had thought they would have to face and to overcome to win the war. German intelligence had blundered. The Russians were fighting as hard as ever, and Moscow was still over 200 miles away. In the middle of September, the Fuhrer decided to intervene in person. At the German field headquarters, he unveiled his new plan. Moscow must be surrounded in such a way that not a man, woman, or child could escape. Then the city was to be flooded. Hitler ordered a huge sea must conceal the Russian capital from the civilized world. Hitler christened it Operation Typhoon. Occasionally there was heavy damage by fire as well as by high explosives. The attack was indiscriminate. It even damaged the embassies of Germany's allies, Italy and Japan. The Moscow subway system, one of the most spacious in the world, became a shelter for hundreds of thousands of ordinary Muscovites. At the Kirov station, deep below ground, the Russian General Staff set up its new offices, working on while the battle continued in the night sky. In the first month of their raids on Moscow, the Nazis lost 200 of their bomber pilots. While below, the children grew accustomed to this new way of life and made a game of it. bombing did not seriously interrupt Moscow's industries. Most of the capital's plants had already switched to armaments. Despite the heavier raids of August and September, their output increased. They rushed it straight to the front. By now, the Nazi panzers were in trouble. Soviet resistance was stiffening all the time, and rain and sleet turned the country roads to mud. Goebbels announced a temporary halt due to weather conditions. On October 20th, Guderian's panzers reached Tula, 100 miles south of Moscow, but could not take it. Tula defied Guderian. Its troops were reinforced with 4,000 men from the workers' battalions, and it fought on as the panzers bypassed it, racing for Moscow. While the militiamen of Tula prepared to defy the German flood, Guderian's panzers had been attacked by some new Russian tanks, the new T-34s, and they were superior to anything in the German arsenal. Up to this point, Guderian concluded early in October, we had enjoyed tank superiority, but from now on, the situation was reversed. In one area, the German operations map showed obstacles at 2 military schools. Here, a handful of cadets, young boys, stood against the weight of the Wehrmacht, expecting only to delay the enemy for as long as they could. They succeeded, at the cost of their lives. The longer the Red Army could delay the Nazis, the more time to regroup and resupply. Soviet strategy was to blunt the panzer's strength from their fixed positions, build up overwhelming reserves, then counterattack. All along the front, Russian units spent themselves against the German army at every crossroad and every village. One small unit had only 28 men left, but it accounted for 50 Nazi tanks. Its commissar was Vasily Klochkov. Russia is enormous, Klochkov said, but there's nowhere to retreat because Moscow is behind us. The mood in Moscow was somber. People were listening to news of the heavy losses at Vyazma and Bryansk. With the Nazis only 40 miles away, the Muscovites could hear the distant thunder of the battle line. Stalin proclaimed a state of siege. The Moscow Communist Party called on everyone to defend the city. $600,000 Muscovites, old and young together, turned out to strengthen the city's defenses. Most of Moscow's manpower volunteered for the workers' battalions. The new infantry, hastily trained, was to march out at once against the Nazi veterans. In the middle of October, conditions had been such that Moscow might cease to be an effective seat of government. Stalin and the Politburo stayed to command the defense. In defiance of the German threat, on November 7th, the traditional Soviet military parade took place in a light fall of snow.
Comrades, Red Army and Red Navy men, officers and political workers, men and women partisans. The whole world is looking upon you as the power capable of destroying the German robber hordes. The enslaved peoples of Europe are looking upon you as their liberators. Be worthy of this great mission. The war you are waging is a war of liberation, a just war.
Many of the troops marched straight to the front lines. On December 2nd in the afternoon, a German column reached Krasnaya Poliana, 16 miles from the center of Moscow. It was as close as any German would come to realizing Hitler's dream. Moscow was now within range of the Nazi heavy artillery. The Germans stayed in Krasnaya Poliana for less than a day. Russian tanks and factory workers, fighting as infantry, drove them out. Zhukov had planned well. On the night of December 4th, along the whole length of the 200-mile northwestern front outside Moscow, the Red Army went on the offensive with 100 divisions. Within 48 hours, the entire center of the German army was under heavy pressure. The Soviet Supreme Command had released its strategic reserve to Zhukov. They were the divisions from Siberia, fit, strong, fresh, superbly trained. Hitler had ordered no withdrawal, but it was an order impossible to obey. The Nazis' three main battle groups lost contact with each other. Army Group Center came close to panic. On December 6th, Guderian wrote in his journal, "All the sacrifices and efforts of our brilliant troops have failed. We have suffered a serious defeat." He retreated 100 miles in 10 days. German defense lines north of Moscow came under savage attack. As General Rokossovsky, commander of the 16th Army, recalled, "We realized that victory in this gigantic battle, covering a huge area where troops from nearly 3 fronts were taking part, would be a turning point in the entire war." Sullenly, the German retreat continued. On December 20th, Guderian, the creator of Germany's armed forces, tried to tell Hitler that his troops were exhausted and overexposed. Hitler called him a coward, and a week later sent him home in disgrace, another victim of Germany's first defeat on land in the Second World War.